Another day, another beat 'em up by Core Design to review. Ain't this channel grand in its unintended focus? This time out, though, we have a sequel to one of the ones I've already reviewed on this here channel, the aptly titled Fighting Force 2. Released on PlayStation 1 and on Sega Dreamcast. Hey, I guess Core got over the developing Streets of Rage thing and decided to give Sega a chance this time out. Being dropped 2 years after the first, I'm expecting the game to be quite the improvement over the first game. Truth be told, I never actually played this one, even though I spent a lot of time with the first and enjoyed it a lot. You're hit with the story straight up in this title, no manual reading needed here.
It's the future, and the world is controlled by the trans-global corporations of the late 20th century. Their crime: illegal bioweapon programming, genetic weaponry based on human DNA. I'm packing the usual body enhancements, and enough firepower to take out a city. It's an invisible war we're fighting, and if you get caught, no one will ever know.
Fighting Force 2 seems to be a massive departure from the first in terms of both story and tone. The first game was essentially a force of badasses fighting someone who was tantamount to a cartoon supervillain bent on initiating the apocalypse so he could rule the new world. Now we've got an international police organization running investigations on megacorporations doing illicit activities. If this game didn't have the name Fighting Force 2, I never would have guessed this was a sequel. The game seems to be centered on the outlawing of human cloning, it being illegal in this dystopian future via an international law. Why? I'm not sure. Maybe the devs thought those purple guys from the first game were really annoying or something. But the idea of an unthinking, unstoppable soldier is just too tantalizing for most of Earth's governments, so illegal research in cloning and biotechnology is rife throughout the mega corporations of the world. In particular, the Nakamichi Corporation seems to be leading the charge, as they are your antagonists for this game. Why do I get the feeling that the name was supposed to be Nakamichi, but they anglicized it for some reason?
Psycops has targeted the Nakamichi Corporation.
After these Psycops gather enough information against them, they send in Special Agent Hawk Manson to assassinate key personnel and destroy all data relevant to their illegal doings. Hawk gets given the cover of an eco-terrorist and told he's basically on his own if he gets caught, so don't get caught. You might have noticed I only mentioned Hawk as well, and that's the most immediately disappointing thing about this game. Only one playable character. No Mace, no Smasher, no Alana. So, one character? No co-op, I guess. No any other old characters at all. None of the others even get mentioned, at least I never saw any mention of them as I played through this game. Not to mention, does this in-game model even look like Hawk at all? It doesn't even look like the Hawk that's on the cover of the game itself. I also think he looks more like the OG Leon from Resident Evil 2. You're first dropped into a steel mill in the USA, one that's an arm of the Nakamichi Corporation. They're making tanks, and that's so bad you gotta go bust them up. So how does this game compare to the first in the most critical aspect? The combat. Not well, that's for sure. 2, in terms of movement, is far slower than the first. Hawk operates on tank controls, for one, so your turns are painfully slow. You do have the ability to do a 180-degree turn, so at least that's something. It won't help you too much, though, if you get jumped at an odd angle, though. You no longer have a run button. Hawk just moves at a fairly quick pace. You can still jump, obviously, but now you can also do a sweet backflip and roll evasively. None of the rolls of the backflips have invincibility frames, though, so you gotta be careful with using them in a tight spot. Combat-wise, you're simultaneously upgraded and downgraded from 1. So side-graded, I guess? For hand-to-hand, you have punches and kicks, which can form combos via different button presses. All of these have different animations and potential uses in combat. Additionally, you have this rage bar that builds when you're in combat or when you drink soda. This rage bar exists to enable your special moves, which are done by holding the R2 button and doing certain combinations. I honestly have no idea if these moves are actually good though, since I had no idea they were a thing until I'd already beaten the game. Not to mention, I feel like the rage bar drains far too quickly, and most enemies you fight can easily be killed with a simple combination or two, so why the special moves? You no longer have a grab though, and there's also no running attacks now either. So you basically have no good way to initiate combat, and your desperation moves are gated behind this crappy bar instead of just costing some life like in every other beat 'em up ever. On the plus side of things though, you do have an inventory now, so not every weapon is fire and forget straight up. It lets you carry a spare weapon on your back, on your hip, with smaller weapons like knives and grenades being stored elsewhere. You can also carry one in your hands and can switch them out with whatever weapon you have in reserve. Weapons can be found in your various bows and smashed onto various environmental objects. I'm happy to report that things violently exploding, like in the first game, is just as present in this one. Which, you'll have to see a lot of these explosions, since you have to smash every breakable object you run across. So you're supposed to be doing damage to the Nakamichi Corporation, and this money bar right here, that's your property damage meter. The higher it goes, you unlock continues. That's really all you need to know about it. Every mission you'll start with a knife and 2 grenades, but there's always plenty more to be found in-game. Weapons can be broken down into melee and range types. You'll want to store your more valuable weapons for use against tougher enemies while breaking every melee weapon on generic grunts, since, well, melee weapons are far more plentiful than your firearms. Melee weapons are also obviously increasing damage done too, and they're just plentiful enough that, you know, use them all you can. Knives, pipes, axes, sledgehammers, and swords are at your disposal. Guns also make an appearance, awkward auto-aim intact, but this time if you hold the shoulder button, the game becomes a very mediocre first-person shooter with inverted aiming that you can't turn off. I know some people prefer inverted aiming, but I hate it from the bottom of my heart. Your hip guns consist of a pistol and a submachine gun. Your back guns consist of a shotgun and an assault rifle. There's also a rocket launcher that locks onto opponents automatically, and a sniper rifle too, as well as a grenade launcher. You also occasionally come across a very heavy weapon which can't be carried in your inventory at all. Stuff like a flamethrower or Old Painless here. These are your fire and forget weapons for sure, but hey, they're big and do big damage. Plus it's just fun to shoot them. FPS aiming is precise in terms of accuracy, but in terms of control, it's a complete nightmare. A waking nightmare you must get used to, since a few enemies in the game are completely out of reach and you have to shoot them. This becomes even worse later in the game when mounted machine gun turrets become insanely commonplace. Level-wise, Fighting Force 2 will take you all over the globe to some very glamorous locations. A steel mill, a research lab, and a car plant too. Simple stuff, often known by evil corporations. This is followed by a remote Arctic research base where the guards have the same death sounds as the lumberjacks from Ninja Shadow of Darkness. Then things take a turn and you end up in a jungle base, which even has a wacky witch doctor as the final boss. Then you take a wrong turn to Albuquerque and end up in fucking Raccoon City. Seriously, zombies come right the fuck out of nowhere in this game. It was so jarring to see. Like, there were mutants in Fighting Force 1, that's a given, but now we just swerve into survival horror territory. You even get a big BOW boss at the end too. But why though? Oh yeah, maybe it has something to do with Resident Evil 2 coming out a year before this game. I joke, but also kinda not. Seriously though, I feel like if you took a screenshot from this level, slapped the fine meter over the life bar, you could probably trick dumb people into thinking this was some sort of Resident Evil prototype. Resident Evil 2.5? Thumbnail, Leon, red circles. Boom, free clickbait. You're welcome, clickbaiters. Since I've mentioned two bosses now, it would be a good time to talk about how bizarre the bosses in this game are, especially versus the first one. Seriously, what was the most absurd boss in the first game? The big guy in the mech suit? Well, the first boss in this game is a giant blacksmith. This is followed by a group of glowing green mutants. Following that is a giant mechanical spider that drops bombs. A giant cave mutant for some reason, the witch doctor I mentioned, then the bio mutant, and an angry crane robot. If you can believe it, it gets even more absurd after those, since you have to fight an immortal pirate. Are we still playing Fighting Force? Normal enemies aren't particularly exciting though, so I guess the bosses kinda had to make up for them. But a very annoying part of this game is, since your field of view can be kinda limited, you'll find yourself walking into a new location only to immediately get fucking loaded up the ass with lead by an out-of-view enemy with a gun. This is the exact same problem Mortal Kombat Special Forces had. It's also something that gets exacerbated, since unlike most beat-em-ups where you get a little bit of invincibility on a knockdown or on taking damage, you don't get that here. You just keep getting shot. The AI in this game doesn't seem particularly good either. Melee characters sometimes don't even notice you and will gleefully ignore you until you bop them on the head once. You find some more wild locations as well, stuff fitting for being an international cop. All of these locations of course have something to do with the illicit activities of the Nakamichi Corporation. From a tank manufacturing plant, to a steel mill, to Alcatraz, and a submarine even. The submarine is where you fight the pirate. I think Alcatraz Island is actually one of the more interesting levels in the game. You're sent there to try to rescue a scientist who's been imprisoned on behalf of the Nakamichi Corporation. You have to search the cells for the doctor, but you can also read the crimes committed by various prisoners locked away behind the cell doors. Then you can freely slaughter them. The text here goes out of the box. Also, what is free jazz terrorism exactly? Later on, you also meet mutated prisoners, subjects of the horrible experimentation going on in the prison. Weirdly though, there's no boss for the prison stage, which I think is a bit of a missed opportunity. Wouldn't it have been cool if a mind-controlled Smasher was the boss here? Since he was a prison lifer that you could rent out, so saith the first game manual at least, but nope. Actually, outside of one mention of Zhang and our protagonist being Hawk, there basically aren't any references to the first game. At least I couldn't find any more. Kinda weird though, since I felt like Mace was more the main character of the first game than Hawk, but no horny allowed in this game, I suppose. Let's skip to the end of the game now, though. You head to the Nakamichi Tower and engage in a violent ascent to the top, fighting suited thugs and ninja women. There's also this weird VR segment for some reason, where you're basically playing asteroids in a 3D realm. This is weird video game inception, and also you have to do it to escape the clutches of whoever put you in here, I guess. Weirdly, there's there's no uber evil CEO to fight, but instead you run across the ultimate being. Didn't I review Parasite Eve last year? Which you don't get to fight, you just have to run away from. Not fight. Running Force 2. It eventually mutates and you have to use the Hammer of Dawn to kill it. After that, though, you run across the true leader of the Nakamichi Corporation. A giant evil supercomputer. You smash it and then you have to immediately escape from the tower. You call for evac, your evac dies because uh-oh, the ultimate being is still there, but no on-rail shooter fight like a thing. You fly off in a small helicopter while the building just falls on the ultimate being. 2 ends much like the first, some big explosions and a tower collapsing as you fly away to safety. Fighting Force 2 was nowhere near as well received as the first game, and honestly, I can see why now. 2 feels like a genuine downgrade in almost every way. I'll say it first, it's nice to have an inventory, but the combat and movement are way too slow and awkward for my liking. The combinations you have available to you don't feel in any way significant from one another, so there really wasn't much of a point in doing anything but punch 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 or kick kick kick. Losing grabs and running attacks in exchange for a rage meter isn't worth it, especially since the rage meter drains way too quickly for any of these moves to be relevant. Not to mention most enemies die too quickly for you to need them anyway. The FPS aiming is awkward as hell, it's moving way too faster precision you need it for. You do still have the auto aim, but you do not want to waste ammo at all, especially since you'll need the bullets to take out of reach enemies, on top of certain bosses only being vulnerable to guns. The tone and setting for this game are also so fucking weird and different from the first that I'd honestly struggle to even identify this as a sequel to Fighting Force. Seriously, if you didn't know, would you have pegged this as a sequel to this? Also, the main guy doesn't look like Hawk at all. Doesn't even resemble the guy on the cover, like I said. I can't shake the feeling this wasn't meant to be a Fighting Force game. Since if you just remove the one mention of Zhang and rename Hawk, this title could have easily been called Psycops or something. Roommate co-op play was also dumb, since beating up people together was one of the most fun parts of the first Fighting Force game, but I guess they thought this one would be able to stand as a single-player title. Some levels just drag on way too long. Some of the levels have up to 4 segments, all of them dragging way too long. Rule of threes, guys. It applies to everything. Fighting Force 2 ended up being the death knell of the franchise, though a Fighting Force 3 was in development at a point. From what I could find about it, 3 seemed to be going back to the roots of the first game. You had multiple characters, 3 of them returning in Hawk, Smasher, and Mace, with new character Jill filling out the roster. You fought thugs in an urban environment, and there seemed to be a big focus on just grabbing weapons from the surroundings to use, on top of having environmental hazards to use on your foes as well. You could rip pipes from buildings, use baseball bats and shotguns, then even toss your enemies into flaming barrels for damage. It's a shame this one never got fully finished, since 2 left a bad taste in my mouth. At the end of the day, though, 2 is just a completely inferior game to 1, so just play 1 and actually have fun instead of slogging through this nightmare. Honestly, the only way to make 2 fun is to enable God mode with this cheat code right here and just shotgun everything to death. But as always, though, I'm HadesManticore, and this was yet another review here on City State Manticore. Thanks a ton for watching. Leave a like and a comment, and drop a sub if you enjoyed and want more. I'll see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.